The divorce papers were sitting beside my coffee cup before I even noticed them. Not because they were hidden. Because after 30 years of marriage, I never imagined I'd find my wife's signature on a document that ended everything we'd built together. The morning had started exactly the way every anniversary morning had started for the last decade. I woke before sunrise, made fresh coffee, and stood on the back porch watching the neighborhood come alive. The roses along the fence were finally blooming after weeks of rain. I smiled to myself, thinking Grace would probably spend half the afternoon trimming them before our dinner reservation. She always said anniversaries weren't about expensive gifts. They're about remembering why we stayed. She'd tell me every year. I believed her. God, I believed every word that woman ever said. I picked up the small velvet box I'd hidden in the kitchen cabinet 2 weeks earlier. Inside was a simple platinum bracelet. Nothing flashy. Grace had never cared much about jewelry. She always preferred thoughtful things. Or at least I thought she did. I wrapped the box in silver paper and placed it beside her breakfast plate. Then I started making pancakes, blueberry, her favorite. For 30 years I never forgot, not once. At exactly 7:30 I heard her footsteps coming downstairs. Only something felt different. There was no sleepy smile, no teasing comment about me making too much coffee, no kiss on my cheek. She walked straight into the kitchen wearing a cream-colored business suit instead of the navy dress she'd bought specifically for our anniversary dinner. Her leather briefcase hung from one shoulder. She looked more like someone heading into a board meeting than someone celebrating 3 decades of marriage. "Morning," I said. She answered with a nod. That was all, no warmth, no affection, nothing. I figured she was stressed. Grace had recently accepted a position as Chief Operations Officer at one of the fastest growing healthcare companies in the state. She'd worked incredibly hard for that promotion. I was proud of her, maybe prouder than she ever knew. While she poured herself coffee, I slid the wrapped bracelet toward her. "Happy anniversary." She glanced at the gift, didn't touch it. Instead, she reached into her briefcase. My stomach tightened for reasons I couldn't explain. She placed a thick envelope beside the gift, neatly, carefully, like she'd rehearsed this moment. "I need you to read these." I smiled. "What is it?" "Ticket somewhere." Numb, her voice was calm, almost emotionless. "It's the divorce petition." I laughed. Not because it was funny, because my brain refused to process the sentence. "What?" She folded her hands. "I've already signed everything." I stared at the envelope, then at her, then back at the envelope again. There had to be some explanation, some misunderstanding. Maybe paperwork for someone else. Maybe a terrible joke. "Grace," my voice barely worked. "What are you talking about?" She finally looked directly into my eyes. "I don't love you anymore." The room became impossibly quiet. Even the coffee maker seemed to stop making noise. "I haven't loved you for years." Those words hit harder than I can describe. Not because marriages don't change, not because people fall out of love, but because we'd spent the previous evening laughing over old photo albums. She'd held my hand while we watched an old home video of our kids playing in the backyard. Nothing had seemed wrong. Nothing. "I don't understand." "You don't have to." She pushed the envelope closer. "I've already rented a condo downtown." "You, what?" "I'm moving out today." I looked around our kitchen. The same kitchen we'd remodeled together. The same table where we'd celebrated birthdays, graduations, Christmas mornings. Everything suddenly felt like a movie set, artificial, disposable. "You've been planning this for months." Months. While I'd been planning anniversary surprises, she'd been planning her escape. I finally noticed something else. Her wedding ring. Gone. I couldn't remember the last time I'd seen her without it. Had it been days, weeks? How had I missed that? Maybe because I'd stopped looking for problems. Maybe because after 30 years you assume forever actually means forever. I don't understand why. You deserve an honest answer. I nodded. I wasn't sure I wanted one anymore. She took a slow sip of coffee before speaking again. "When I met you, you were exactly what I needed." The sentence sounded strange, almost clinical. "You were stable, you were dependable, you gave me security." Each word landed like another stone. I came from nothing. I had student loans. I had no connections. I had no safety net. I listened in silence. "You helped me finish graduate school." "Yes." "You supported me while I built my career." "Yes." "You encouraged every promotion." I swallowed.
"Yes."
She leaned back. "And now," she paused. "I don't need that bridge anymore." I frowned. "What bridge?" Her expression never changed. "You." The word hung between us. "You were just the bridge to a better life." I felt something inside me collapse. Not anger, not yet, just disbelief. 30 years, reduced to one sentence. A bridge, not a husband, not a partner, not the father of our children. A bridge. She stood up. I'll have the movers here this afternoon. I looked at the wrapped bracelet still sitting beside her untouched coffee mug. I bought you a gift. I know. You didn't even open it. I don't think that would help either of us. She walked toward the front door, then stopped without turning around. I hope one day you'll understand this wasn't personal. I almost laughed again. Not personal. How could the destruction of an entire marriage be anything else? The front door closed softly behind her. No shouting, no dramatic exit, just silence. I sat there for what could have been 10 minutes or an hour. I honestly don't know. My coffee had gone cold. The pancakes were untouched. The bracelet remained wrapped exactly the way I'd left it. Finally, I forced myself to open the envelope. Everything had already been prepared. Property division, financial disclosures, retirement accounts, even a proposed timeline for selling our vacation cabin. She hadn't made a decision overnight. She'd dismantled our entire life piece by piece while smiling across the dinner table every evening. Then I noticed something odd. Tucked inside the legal documents was a folded receipt. It wasn't related to the divorce. It was from an upscale furniture gallery across town. One item had been circled in blue ink, a handcrafted walnut dining table. Delivery scheduled for that afternoon. The delivery address wasn't our home. It was the downtown condo she'd mentioned. Under the address, someone had handwritten 4 words, "Ready for our beginning." There was no signature, no name, just those 4 words. I was still staring at the note, trying to make sense of it, when someone knocked on the front door. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. I wasn't expecting anyone. Grace had already left. The movers weren't due for hours. I opened the door. Standing on my porch was a silver-haired woman I'd never seen before, holding a weathered leather folder against her chest. She looked directly at me and said quietly, "Are you Daniel Harper? I've been trying to find you for almost 30 years, and what I'm about to show you is the real reason your wife wanted this divorce." For a second, I just stood there, one hand still on the doorknob. My mind was already shattered from what Grace had done. Now a complete stranger was telling me she'd been looking for me for 30 years. "I think you've got the wrong house." She slowly shook her head. "I've checked this address 3 times. You're Daniel Harper. You worked at Riverside Steel before opening Harper Home Services. Your father was Thomas Harper. Every detail was correct." I stepped aside. "You'd better come in." She walked into the kitchen, looked at the untouched breakfast on the table, then at the divorce papers. A sadness crossed her face. "I see I'm late. What do you mean?" She carefully placed the old leather folder on the table. "My name is Evelyn Mercer." The name meant nothing to me. "I worked with your father. That caught my attention. My father had died 28 years earlier from what everyone believed was a heart attack. He'd been 58. Hardworking, honest. The kind of man who fixed neighbors' fences without charging them. I haven't heard his name from anyone in years." "I know." She took a deep breath. "He asked me to find you if something ever happened to him." I frowned. "My father never mentioned you." "He couldn't." "Why not?" "Because he promised someone he wouldn't." Nothing about this conversation made sense. She opened the leather folder. Inside were yellowed documents, old photographs, and several sealed envelopes. Everything had been organized with surprising care. "The man who asked your father to keep these safe didn't trust his own family." I rubbed my forehead. "I'm sorry, but what does any of this have to do with my wife filing for divorce an hour ago?" Evelyn didn't answer immediately. Instead, she pulled out a photograph. It showed my father standing beside another man outside what looked like an old manufacturing plant. Both men were smiling. The photograph had a date written on the back, October 1995. "The other man is Richard Alden." The name sounded familiar, then it hit me. Richard Alden, founder of Alden Medical Systems, one of the wealthiest businessmen our state had ever produced. His company had eventually become part of the healthcare corporation, where Grace now served as chief operations officer. I looked back at Evelyn. My father knew Richard Alden. They were more than acquaintances, friends. They trusted each other with their lives. That was impossible. My father had been a maintenance supervisor. Richard Alden had been worth hundreds of millions. Their worlds shouldn't have crossed. Unless, I don't understand. Neither did I. She slid another document across the table. It was handwritten, signed by Richard Alden. I've carried this for almost 3 decades. The letter wasn't long. It explained that Richard believed someone inside his own family was trying to force him out of his company. If anything happened to him, certain records had to remain hidden until the right time. My father had agreed to protect them. I looked up, but Richard Alden died 25 years ago. I know. The newspapers said it was cancer. They did. Her answer was careful, too careful. You don't believe that. I believe many people benefited from everyone believing that. A chill ran through me. She reached for another envelope. This one had never been opened. My father's handwriting covered the front. To Daniel, open only if Evelyn believes you are in danger. My hand started shaking. I recognized every curve of his handwriting. It was the first thing he'd ever written directly to me that I'd seen in decades. My voice cracked. I've never seen this. He told me you'd probably never need it. So why now? She looked toward the divorce papers. Because your wife's promotion changed everything. My heart skipped. What? 6 months ago, Grace became Chief Operations Officer. Yes. Do you know what department she oversees? Operations, specifically. I thought about it. She'd talked about mergers, facilities, corporate restructuring, archive digitization. Then it clicked. The Historical Records Department. Evelyn nodded. Exactly. She reached into the folder and removed a newspaper clipping. The headline announced that Alden Medical Systems had begun digitizing every corporate record dating back 40 years. It sounds harmless. Why does it matter? Because your father didn't hide paper. She paused. He hid proof. I stared at her. What proof? She looked directly into my eyes. Proof that the current ownership of Alden Medical Systems isn't what people think. The room suddenly felt much smaller. My father never told me any of this. He couldn't. Why? Because the fewer people who knew, the safer everyone would be. I laughed bitterly. Safe. My wife just ended a 30-year marriage. Evelyn leaned forward. Daniel, I don't think she left because she stopped loving you. I blinked. What? I think she left because someone convinced her she'd gain something by doing it. I felt anger rising. No, you don't know Grace. I don't. But I've spent months watching the people around her. That made me freeze. You've been watching my wife. I've been watching the executives around your wife. She slid another photograph across the table. This one was recent. Very recent. Grace was walking into an expensive restaurant. She wasn't alone. A tall man in a tailored charcoal suit held the door open for her. He looked confident. Comfortable. Who's that? Victor Alden. I stared. The CO, Richard Alden's youngest son. I had seen Victor's face in business magazines. He'd inherited the company after years of internal family disputes. Grace had mentioned him exactly twice. Both times she'd described him as demanding but brilliant. Nothing more. They've had dinner together 12 times in the last 3 months. I swallowed. Business dinners happen. They do. She placed another photo on the table, then another. Weekend lunches. Private golf club, a charity gala. None of them looked romantic. But none of them looked strictly professional either. Every picture showed Victor standing just a little too close, watching Grace instead of the cameras. I suddenly remembered the handwritten note, ready for our beginning, the furniture delivery, the downtown condo. A cold feeling spread through my chest. Evelyn quietly asked, did Grace ever mention moving into the condo alone? I thought back. She hadn't. Not once. I had simply assumed. Before I could answer, my phone vibrated. Our daughter Emma. I answered immediately. Dad. Her voice sounded breathless. Mom isn't answering her phone. I know. There was a long silence. You know, she filed for divorce this morning. Emma gasped. What? I closed my eyes. It's over, no. She sounded completely stunned. That can't be right. It is. Another pause. Dade. What? I wasn't going to tell you because I thought maybe it was work. But last week, I saw Mom with someone. Every muscle in my body tightened. Ooh. I don't know his name. They were leaving that new restaurant by the river. I waved. They both looked shocked. Mom told me he was just her boss. I slowly looked at the photographs spread across my kitchen table. Victor Alden. Emma continued softly. There was something else. What? I heard Mom arguing on the phone yesterday. She kept saying. Emma hesitated. Once the divorce is final, nothing can stop the transfer. I felt my stomach drop. Transfer. That's exactly what she said. Before I could ask another question, Evelyn quietly whispered, ask your daughter one more thing. I covered the phone. What? The exact words. I nodded. Are you sure? I remember because it sounded strange. She took a breath. she said. "Once Daniel signs everything, the transfer will finally belong to us." The room fell silent. I looked from my daughter's name on the signs everything. The transfer will finally belong to us. The room fell silent. I looked from my daughter's name on the phone screen or to my father's unopened letter, to Victor Alden's photographs, odd, and finally to the divorce papers still lying on the table. For the first time all morning, I stopped seeing the divorce as the end of my marriage. I started seeing it as the first move in a game I didn't even know I was playing. Just then, Evelyn slowly pushed my father's sealed envelope toward me. "Daniel, I think it's finally time you read what your father spent the last year of his life trying to protect." I stared at the envelope for a long time. It was yellowed around the edges, but the seal was still intact. My father had addressed it to me almost 3 decades earlier. For years, it had existed somewhere in the world without me knowing. Now it was sitting inches from my hand. I broke the seal. Inside was a single handwritten letter and a small brass key taped to the corner. The first line stopped me cold. "Daniel, if you're reading this, then someone finally came looking for what I was asked to protect." I recognized every stroke of my father's handwriting. It felt like hearing his voice again. He explained that years before his death, Richard Alden had discovered financial manipulation inside his own company. At first, Richard believed it was ordinary fraud. It wasn't. A small group of executives had quietly shifted ownership through shell companies and hidden agreements. The changes were buried so deeply that even auditors couldn't see the full picture. Richard planned to expose everything, but before he could, he became seriously ill. Knowing he might not have much time left, he gathered every original agreement, every ownership ledger, and every handwritten amendment that proved who truly controlled the company. My father wasn't chosen because he was powerful. He was chosen because he was honest. Richard trusted him more than anyone wearing a suit. The letter ended with a sentence that made my chest tighten. "Never chase money, son. Chase the truth. If the truth survives, justice usually finds its own way." I folded the letter carefully. "What does this key open?" Evelyn smiled faintly. "A safe deposit box. Where?" "Your father never told me." I looked again. There was a tiny number engraved into the key, 417, nothing else. "No bank." She shook her head. "He insisted only you should discover that." Before I could think any further, the front door opened. Emma hurried inside. The moment she saw my face, she wrapped her arms around me. "I'm so sorry, Dad." I hugged her back. For the first time that day, I let myself cry, not loudly, just enough for 30 years of trust to begin breaking apart. When we finally sat down, Emma noticed Evelyn. After introductions, I explained everything we'd learned. She listened without interrupting. When I mentioned Victor Alden, her expression changed. "I've seen him before." "You have?" She nodded. "At Mom's company, Guyla. You never told me." "I didn't think it mattered." "What happened?" "He introduced Mom to everyone as the future of this company." I frowned. "That sounds like something a CEO would say." Emma hesitated. "There was more." He put his hand on Mom's shoulder. "Not like a boss, like someone making a promise." The room grew quiet. Then my phone rang. "Grace." I almost ignored it. Instead, I answered. "What?" Her voice remained strangely calm. "I forgot one thing." "What?" "The house." I looked around the kitchen. "What about it?" "I'll need you to vacate within 60 days. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "You already have a condo. That isn't permanent. This house is too large for one person." I laughed bitterly. "So now you're deciding where I live. The attorneys will explain everything." I took a slow breath. "Grace." "What?" "I have one question." Silence. "Were 30 years together ever real?" She didn't answer immediately. Finally she said, "You were exactly who I needed back then." "That's not what I asked." Another pause.
Carried.
"Yes, but people change." Then she ended the call. No apology, no hesitation, nothing. Emma wiped away tears. I don't even recognize her. Neither did I. That evening, Evelyn insisted we shouldn't wait. If those records still exist, other people may already be searching for them. We began with every bank my father had ever used. The third branch finally recognized the key. The manager disappeared into the vault. A few minutes later, he returned carrying a heavy steel box. "It hasn't been opened since your father's death." He checked my identification twice before placing it on the table. My hands trembled as I unlocked it. Inside were 3 thick binders, several notarized documents, a bundle of cassette tapes, and a sealed envelope marked to be opened only if ownership is ever challenged. Evelyn slowly exhaled. "He really kept everything." Back at my house, we spent hours examining the files. The binders contained original shareholder agreements, early investment contracts, meeting minutes signed by Richard Alden himself. Nothing seemed dramatic until Emma noticed something. "Dad." She pointed to a signature page. "Look at these percentages. The original ownership records didn't match the company's public filings. Not even close. Several shares that had supposedly been sold decades earlier had never legally changed hands. Instead, they had been placed into a protected voting trust until specific legal conditions were met. Those conditions had never occurred, which meant the current ownership structure is wrong." Evelyn nodded. "And if these originals are authenticated—" She didn't finish. She didn't have to. The implications were enormous. Then we opened the final envelope. Inside was a typed memorandum signed by Richard Alden. It named the independent law firm responsible for verifying the documents if they were ever recovered. The firm still existed. The next morning, we met with one of the senior partners. He spent nearly 2 hours reviewing everything without saying much. Finally, he removed his glasses. "Mr. Harper," his tone had completely changed. "These documents appear authentic." My heartbeat quickened. "If they are authenticated through forensic examination—" He carefully chose his next words. "Someone has controlled Alden Medical Systems under legally questionable authority for many years." Emma stared at him. "So what happens now?" "We notify the court, and the board, and the regulators." The attorney closed the last binder. But before any of that, he looked directly at me. "There's something else you should know." He slid one document across the desk. It wasn't about ownership. It was about the divorce. Attached to Grace's filing was a confidential financial disclosure that had already been subpoenaed as part of another corporate investigation. The attorney tapped a highlighted line. "Your wife disclosed receiving a future compensation package worth several $1,000,000. I frowned. "That's just executive pay." He slowly shook his head. "No. This payment only becomes effective if the current ownership structure remains legally unchanged." The room went silent. Emma whispered, "So if the truth comes out—" The attorney nodded. "That compensation disappears." I suddenly understood. The divorce, the rush, the pressure for me to sign, the transfer Emma had overheard. It wasn't just the end of a marriage. Someone needed everything settled before these records surfaced. Just then, the attorney's assistant rushed into the office without knocking. "Sir." She looked pale. "You need to see this." She handed him a tablet. He read the headline, then looked up at me. His expression was grim. "Mr. Harper, Victor Alden has just announced a surprise press conference." He turned the screen toward us. The announcement was scheduled for that afternoon. Its title was only one sentence: "A historic leadership transition at Alden Medical Systems." And standing beside Victor in the promotional photo was Grace. For a moment, none of us spoke. The photo on the tablet showed Victor Alden smiling confidently, with Grace standing beside him. She wasn't in the background. She was positioned where executives stood when they wanted the public to see them as part of the company's future. The attorney looked at me. "If they make today's announcement before we file these documents, it won't erase your evidence, but it could make the legal process far more complicated." "How much time do we have?" He checked his watch. "Just under 2 hours." His team moved immediately. One attorney contacted the court. Another arranged for the original documents to be transferred under secure chain of custody. A forensic document examiner was already on the way. Everything suddenly moved faster than I could process. I wasn't thinking about the company anymore. I was thinking about my marriage. 30 years reduced a carefully timed legal strategy. By early afternoon, the law firm had filed an emergency petition asking the court to preserve all historical ownership records until the documents could be authenticated. The attorney looked relieved. "Whatever happens at that press conference, the evidence is now officially part of the record." For the first time that day, I felt like I could breathe. Then my phone rang. "Grace," I answered. "What is it?" Her voice was no longer calm. "Have you spoken to anyone?" "I've spoken to a few people." There was a pause. "What exactly does that mean?" "It means I know this divorce wasn't just about us." Silence. Then she asked quietly, "Who came to the house?" That told me everything. She already knew someone had found me. "I think you know the answer." "Daniel." Her voice had changed. It almost sounded nervous. "Don't let other people fill your head with stories." "I've read my father's letter." Another silence, longer this time. When she finally spoke, her confidence was gone. "I was going to explain everything." "Were you?" Yes, when, after I signed the papers, she didn't answer. I ended the call. We watched Victor's press conference from the conference room at the law firm. Reporters filled the room. Cameras flashed. Victor stepped to the podium. He thanked employees. He spoke about growth, innovation, the future. Then he smiled. Today marks the beginning of a new chapter. He invited Grace onto the stage. Applause echoed through the room. Victor announced that Grace would become executive president following what he called a major organizational transition. Then a reporter raised a hand. Mr. Alden, we've received confirmation that a court has issued an emergency preservation order involving your company's historical ownership records. Would you like to comment? Victor froze. It lasted less than 2 seconds, but everyone saw it. What preservation order? He asked. Another reporter stood. Our newsroom received the filing minutes ago. A third reporter spoke before Victor could answer. Does this have anything to do with allegations that original shareholder agreements have resurfaced? The room changed instantly. Victor glanced toward Grace. She looked just as surprised. Questions came from every direction. Is the board aware? Are regulators involved? Have investors been notified? Victor ended the press conference less than 5 minutes later without making another announcement. The next several weeks were nothing like television dramas. There were no dramatic courtroom speeches, no shocking confessions, just investigators, auditors, forensic accountants, corporate attorneys, thousands of pages of records, the original documents held up under forensic examination, ink, paper, signatures, everything matched. Independent experts confirmed they were authentic. The investigation found years of unauthorized corporate restructuring that ignored the original legal agreements Richard Alden had signed. Some decisions had been made in good faith by people who never knew the originals existed. Others had not. Several executives resigned. Others faced civil lawsuits over decisions made while relying on inaccurate ownership records. Victor stepped down while the investigation continued. The board appointed an interim leadership team until everything could be sorted out. Grace's promotion disappeared before it officially began. So did the compensator touch it. About 3 months after our anniversary, Grace asked to meet, not through attorneys. Personally, we met at a small park where we'd once taken our children every Saturday. She looked older, not because of time, because of exhaustion. She sat across from me without saying anything for nearly a minute. Finally, she spoke. I made the biggest mistake of my life. I listened. I convinced myself I deserved more. She looked down. At first it was just work. Victor kept telling me I was wasting my life. He said I'd carried everyone else long enough. He said I should start thinking about myself. She wiped her eyes. I believed him. I remembered the sentence she'd spoken over breakfast. You were just the bridge to a better life. I'll never forget what you said. I know. I've repeated it to myself every day. She looked at me. I can't take it back. No. You can't. Another long silence settled between us. I wasn't having an affair when this started. She spoke carefully, but I crossed lines I shouldn't have. I let ambition become more important than loyalty. I told myself I could fix everything later. She gave a sad smile. There wasn't a later. For the first time since our anniversary, I believed she was telling me the truth. Not because it changed anything, because she finally had nothing left to gain. She reached into her purse and placed a small box on the bench. I opened it. Inside was the platinum bracelet I'd bought for our anniversary, still wrapped. I found it after I moved. I couldn't throw it away. I closed the box. You should keep it, she nodded. I don't deserve it. No, you don't, she stood. I'm sorry, Daniel. I know. It was the first honest conversation we'd had in years. 6 months later, the divorce was finalized. There wasn't a fight over the house. Grace withdrew several of her earlier demands before the settlement was completed. She admitted they had been based on advice she now regretted following. Emma stayed close, closer than ever. One evening she came over for dinner and laughed. You know what Mom told me? What? She said she spent 30 years looking for success. And when she finally thought she'd found it, she realized she'd traded away the people who made her feel successful in the first place. I looked around my dining room. It was quiet, peaceful, not empty, different. For months I'd believed my wife had destroyed my life. The truth was harder to accept. She had only destroyed the version of life we were pretending still existed. Everything after that was built on honesty. It wasn't the future I expected, but it was one I could finally trust. My father had written one last sentence at the bottom of his letter. I didn't understand it until everything was over. A bridge isn't something to be ashamed of, son. Bridges carry people forward. The right ones are remembered long after those who simply crossed them. For years, Grace believed I had only been a bridge. In the end, she discovered something I already knew. People who use others as stepping stones often find themselves standing alone.